Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
For those closely following the Bill Scher dog saga, we are taping a little more late morning today, which I think is closer to dog nap time. So hopefully, less of a disruption than the past couple of days, past couple of weeks.
One thing is for sure, you don't like that dog, but that dog loves you.
I'm not convinced of that. But we definitely tolerate each other.
Well, there are marriages that are built on less than that. So we'll take it this holiday season. Where do you want to start? It seems like there's no dominant story this week per se, but a few stories that I think could pass for dominant stories.
I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff going on. They're trying to keep the government open in Congress. McCarthy's still, touch and go. Cinema shook things up. But I don't know what's on your mind.
Well, first, this is a good time to plug. You and I had to do an emergency podcast last week after we
Yes,
turned off the lights on the DMZ and shut that down for the week. The cinema news happened, and the Brittany Griner news happened, and so you
right.
and I did an audio podcast at Matt Lewis in the News. And if you are only watching or listening to the DMZ and you missed us talking about those topics, we did 45 minutes basically on the cinema switch. So check that out.
Right. And so we don't need
Bill,
to
I think
we don't
we
need
should
to
start. I think we should start this week with a tried and true uh, 2022 DMZ topic because it's a topic that keeps on giving. It's a gift that keeps on giving, and that is Ron DeSantis overtaking Donald Trump, and not only overtaking Donald Trump, but doing it in an interesting way, including the latest has to do with him launching investigations into vaccinations. At least
Well,
that's my.
I wouldn't connect those dots. I mean,
I might.
we have which is the. I mean, he did this anti-vaccine roundtable yesterday, Wednesday,
But it's
and
indicative. But I think it is indicative of something, Bill, which I think is that everybody wants someone to run against Trump. And the main thing we want them to do is to beat Trump by virtue of being less uh, crazy than Trump, right? Because then it's a moral victory, right? You're not just beating Trump, you're beating Trumpism. But the problem with that is it sort of looks like you're hitting him from the left, and it doesn't work with the Republican electorate. The Republican base today doesn't want someone who's going to beat Trump by pointing out that Trump is like, let's say, too extreme. Then the second thing we might settle for, Bill, is we might settle for like, well, Trump is too chaotic and he's a loser. Ron DeSantis isn't even doing that. I think Ron DeSantis, it seems to me, Bill, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like he's laying the predicate here for having a way to attack Donald Trump from the right. Donald Trump, the guy who was behind Operation Warp Speed, who got booed. You remember Donald Trump got booed for talking about vaccines. I think it was at a fundraiser a while back. So maybe this is part of part of Ron DeSantis' appeal, part of the reason that he is actually running ahead. And I think the main thing is obviously the midterm losses. But
but I think we should try to separate these things out to some extent. So first, we had a series of polls come out last few days where when you test DeSantis and Trump head to head amongst Republicans, DeSantis is ahead. Although I did see one poll where Trump was ahead, that was Maris, but there's at least I think three others where DeSantis is ahead. You're not seeing DeSantis ahead when you're testing a larger field of Republicans. Trump is still holding plurality first place when you're testing a broad field. Now, of course, we don't even know what the field's going to be. We don't know how many people are actually going to be in this field. So it's all a little murky at this point. But so I think we can say DeSantis has established himself as the primary Trump alternative. We can't say with confidence that Trump can't still win this primary so long as the anti-Trump vote is divided to some degree. Now, and to get this to the other point, this vaccine point, DeSantis has definitely made his primary persona / theory of the case as I'm the guy that kept Florida free. We had to choose freedom over Fauciism. And he's a stump speech that he's honed. It's chock full of stats, which may be of dubious quality, but nevertheless, it sounds very erudite when he does it. To make the case that he did not get suckered by the so-called experts, and Florida is thriving because of it, so he has a model to export to the rest of the country. That basic argument is not really tethered to being a vaccine skeptic. It is much more of an anti-mandate, anti-lockdown argument.
I agree. Let me just put a pin in it real quick, Bill, because I think that I'm willing to give DeSantis some credit. And I think that Florida was great. I went to Florida toward the end of COVID, and it was awesome to not have to wear the mask. At that point, the mask wearing was pretty performative, I would say. Now, Florida is sort of spread out. There's a lot of warm weather. People can be outside more. But I think that DeSantis does deserve some credit for kind of, reopening his state at the right time. Some of it, I think he deserves some credit for. Maybe he got lucky. I don't know. But that is, as you were pointing out, Bill, that is different than the question of vaccines, because in my opinion, where I split with the COVID hawks was after vaccines. I was very much cautious and conservative about COVID. And then we got the vaccines. And that's when I felt like it was wrong that they were, for example, keeping schools closed way too long. So, but to me, the key was getting a vaccine. Getting the vaccines for me was a key. Once I was vaccinated, then, if I'm in a crowded area, maybe I'll wear a mask. But I sort of went about my life as normal. I think that's what happened in Florida. But it's more concerning to me to attack the idea of vaccines for a whole bunch of reasons, including what happens the next time something like this happens. And we've undermined the whole concept of vaccines in order to win elections.
I do want to ask you. So, one, I don't want to debate DeSantis's record on this here, because I think that would take us in a whole down another rabbit hole, which I don't think I want to do right now. But I just want to say, for the record, I don't necessarily agree that he deserves all this credit. But let's save that for another time. I want to ask you how does Matt Lewis feel about Ron DeSantis now because of this vaccine stuff? But let's also save that for a little bit. Just as a political matter, let's stipulate that I have been I've underestimated DeSantis repeatedly over the past 2 years. I am Bill Scher got to take a victory lap on Katie Hobbs and Carrie Lake before. I get no Ron DeSantis. Yeah, I get no Ron DeSantis victory laps. I constantly misjudge this guy.
That's because the Republican electorate is, well, I don't want to say inscrutable, but it defies logic. It defies.
I think Florida defies logic. Florida's operating differently than much of the rest of the country. So that's what's making it hard for me. And my gut to a lot of DeSantis decision making always is why aren't you quitting while you're ahead? You've made it's like a gambler in a casino. You've made all these crazy bets. They're all paying off. I'm like, hey, take your winnings and go home. Why do you keep betting more? You're already making headway against Trump. You already got this freedom over Fauciism thing working for you. Do you have to go full blown anti-vax too? What's the point? And just to clarify, you
Yeah.
had a round table with a bunch of, people that have pedigrees, so it seems like it's all very scientific, but these are generally, I think, seen as quacks. And he's saying he's going to call on the Florida Supreme Court to impanel a grand jury and investigate the vaccine makers for spreading misinformation about vaccines. And he's creating a government committee that essentially functions as a counterweight to the CDC. So they'll put out their own stuff that would say the CDC is wrong about X, Y, or Z. He already has a Florida Surgeon General who's a crank on this stuff, but he uses as someone who had with a nominal pedigree to make it seem like it has some legitimacy behind it. Jonathan Chait has a piece at New York Magazine arguing that there is a big enough anti-vax constituency in the Republican Party for this to make political sense for him.
That's my point. No, that's my point. I think that Ron DeSantis understand. Now, you and I, our instincts, I think, probably have been redeemed when it comes to winning general elections. Okay, but if your goal is to beat Donald Trump and to win a Republican primary, then you're going to have to do things like this that don't make sense to you and I. This would go against our instincts. We would not think this is a smart idea. But crazy sells, and conspiracy theories sell, and not trusting the elites or the experts sells in the Republican primary. And that is what DeSantis is doing. I think that my reading of this is that DeSantis is very shrewd and that he has a much keener understanding of the Republican primary electorate than you or I, which, and again, I think it could totally backfire in a general election. That's a different topic. But for now, there's a great movie, Raising Arizona, the Coen brothers. And
that's a great movie.
Randall Tex Cobb has a line where he says, if you want an outlaw, you hire an outlaw. If you want to find a Dunkin' Donuts, get a cop. And I think maybe that's the Ron DeSantis theory here, is that, like, you're not going to beat Donald Trump by being more reasonable than Donald Trump, or by being like just slightly less crazy than Donald Trump. That's not going to do it. Donald Trump is vulnerable on the right. He is vulnerable when it comes to COVID because Trump, the one good thing Trump did was Operation Warp Speed. And therefore he's vulnerable because he did that one good thing in the Republican electorate.
Now, again, you can't take my word for anything when it comes to DeSantis. But I do think there are pitfalls for the path he's on. One is, sure, this may make a lot of sense, short-run primary, but not long-term general election. But I think, everyone says early polls don't matter, but I think they do matter in terms of people's perceptions of the race and primary voters. Democratic primary voters definitely have prioritized electability in recent primaries. Republicans less so. But if the DeSantis boomlet is driven in part by Trump's a loser, he's making us lose races, we need somebody who can win. If DeSantis starts getting a reputation of being, too crazy for prime time, and he's losing to Biden, I mean, the polls I've seen of Biden and DeSantis are basically competitive. And certain polls have DeSantis doing a little bit better than Trump versus Biden, but not all of them. And I averaged a bunch out the other day, and I think Biden was ahead of Trump by like 2 and change. And Biden was ahead of DeSantis by like less than half a percentage point. So that's what we're talking about here. But you're still talking basically, dead heat within the margin of error races. Let's say DeSantis becomes known for being an anti-vax crank, and that puts him 5 points behind Biden. Does that then have a domino effect where it becomes less appealing as a Trump alternative if he's seen to be someone who's going to lose the general?
Yeah, I mean, if we get to that point, but again, we're talking about someone who just won re-election by 19 points in the state of Florida. and someone who was beating Donald Trump in a lot of
in the
these
state of
polls.
Florida, I think is the key point there. He won big in a state which is no longer a bellwether state.
No, you and I both know that, but Florida is a big, important state. And in recent memory, it has been a swing state, the swing state. So I think in terms of perception, he doesn't have to worry. He has the perception of being a winner. And I think it will take a lot to change that. I do think he has realized it's not enough to beat Donald Trump. It's not enough to just call Trump a loser. So I think he's going to have that, and he's going to have COVID too. I would also say that even though I am a big supporter of vaccinations and I'm very concerned about the anti-vaxxer thing, I think it would be wrong to, number one, assume that the only people he's appealing to are sort of rabid anti-vaxxers. I mean, he's tapping into people who just don't quite know about vaccines or want to do more research or who want to look into it, who don't trust the elites, who don't trust the experts. And I'm telling you, COVID really also scrambled. It really did a lot of weird reordering, and it radicalized people. There are people I know who become very passionate about that. So I think there is a constituency of people out there across the country who are, in many cases, liberals or former Democrats who this very well may appeal to, Bill.
Well, here's the thing that I think is weird about the DeSantis choice here. I think most normal people are just done talking about COVID. I mean, the argument has already been won that we're not going to mask all the time. We're not going to lock down everything all the time. We have a vaccine. Even if there's a spike, we're just going to muddle through it. You know, some people are going to get it and sucks for them, but you know, that's been adjudicated and resolved. And people want to put it in the rearview mirror. DeSantis cannot stop talking about it. I mean, this is COVID to DeSantis is 2020 for Trump. They just can't let it go.
That's an interesting.
One of the reasons why
I would say the
Trump is sorry.
Well, both are self-serving, right? DeSantis wants to talk about COVID because the perception is that was the issue he championed and that he was right on. I think that when Trump is obsessed with 2020, it's more solipsistic and more navel-gazing and more backward-looking. But I think that is an interesting insight. Bill, another point I want to make about DeSantis is, unlike Donald Trump, I think there's a chance that DeSantis can pivot. I think that DeSantis can run a certain type of race in a primary and then pivot and be more gubernatorial, senatorial, professional than Trump. And we saw him do it after he got elected the first time in Florida. DeSantis spent a couple of years just kind of doing a good job until COVID happened.
I mean, it may be that
I think Trump didn't have the capacity emotionally to pivot, and I think DeSantis does.
It's possible that DeSantis is less of a broken person emotionally, and in a completely cold and soulless and calculating way, can pivot, can recognize, okay, it's time to do the next thing. He wasn't Mr. Lockdown right away. He wasn't Mr. Stop transgender talk in schools right away. He didn't have.
Well, he was pushing vaccinations. In fact.
Right. And, Kirsty Noem, who's someone who wants to run for president, she had a line a year ago. She didn't name DeSantis directly, but it was implied, certain people claim that they locked down the beaches when they really didn't, something like that. She's trying to argue like she really did it and he didn't really do it right away. And Trump made a point like that. He, in his Truth Social post the other day, he tried to suggest that DeSantis was overplaying his case. Forgive me for digressing a bit there. My point is that I do think DeSantis has the capacity to pivot. It's less of an emotional impulse for him, perhaps. And the reason why I think he was more appealing to people over the past year is that he was constantly picking new fights. Again, my gut always was, why are you picking that fight? Why don't you cut your losses? but he's keeping it fresh. He's going
Yeah.
to go after Disney. He's going to do the Don't Say Gay bill. He's always going to find something to
Yeah.
do that's new.
And I
And
would
Trump is doing
venture,
same old, same old. But
yeah.
the DeSantis getting too stuck in this COVID rut to be able to keep doing that for the next year.
I mean, I would venture to say DeSantis has a better feel than you or I do, and he could pick a new fight with someone new next week. I mean, our instinct, and I think as a conservative, this is a conservative desire. I like comity. I like peace. There's a really good book I read about 20 years ago by H.L. Richardson, who was the founder of Gun Owners of California. And it's more of a primer than a book. It's almost a pamphlet, but it's called Confrontational Politics. And essentially, this guy who was obviously on the right studied the left and, in fact, even like communists, and how that they were constantly on the march. They never wanted peace. They always, basically agitators are never satiated. They're constantly doing more. There's always a desire for action, and that goes against what I like. Sort of a conservative American. I want things to settle down. I want to get my shit together for the holidays and just have some rest and relaxation and peace. But these agitators, these activists are always stirring shit up. And H.L. Richardson's insight was, this is what the left does. We should be doing it. And I think that's what DeSantis is doing. He doesn't want things to settle down or calm down. You have got to be constantly pushing, fighting, picking fights, picking battles. And so, I think our instinct, Bill, is, why would you do that? You're popular. Like, let well enough alone. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And he's like, hold my beer. Let's go after Mickey Mouse.
We probably should not talk about DeSantis, for the entire show. There are other things to talk about. I want to say one last thing, though. I don't know if he has like a personal feel for it. I don't know if he's a true savant in that way. I mean, I can't know, but I was struck by the New York Times profile of him that came out in the fall that noted that he has his staff constantly monitor the Libs of TikTok Twitter account, which is constantly trying to like pick up random videos of liberals saying supposedly crazy things and making them look terrible. I just think he has a system in place where he's tracking right-wing opinion online and is chasing that opinion, which obviously has its merits in terms of trying to establish a feel if you don't have it naturally. But I certainly would worry if I cared about DeSantis's long-term viability, that I don't know if you want that tail wagging the dog all the time.
I think you're totally right, Bill. Whereas I think Trump is an instinct player who goes by the gut. I think DeSantis, and I might have been, I think I've been saying that he has an instinct for this, but I think you're actually technically correct. I don't think it's an instinct as much as it is data. I think that DeSantis is very smart and is sort of playing this money ball. He's got spreadsheets and he's collecting data. And so I think that Trump is sort of stumbling into things. Sometimes Trump gets lucky. Sometimes Trump makes a huge mistake. He's going on instinct. Whereas I think DeSantis is actually going by data. I think DeSantis is meticulous and organized. And I guess the question would be, what does this say? If the only way to beat Trump is to go with a guy who is, even if it's strategically, even if he feels that he has to do this strategically, but if he has to become sort of an anti-vaxxer to beat Trump, like, to what end? Like, what does that say about the Republican Party? B, is it worth it? Like, even if DeSantis is able to beat Trump, if he has to do this to beat Trump, are we going to be better off, than with Trump?
Is Matt Lewis reaching for that train cord to stop the DeSantis train and get off?
Not yet, Bill. I think that So I'm an introspective person. I try to be. So I'm open to this question. But I still think in my lifetime, there's been one person who has tried to overturn, a free and fair presidential election. And definitely, we could quibble about that first assertion, but there's definitely only been one person who's tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power of the presidency, and it's Donald Trump. And so, um, say what you will about Ron DeSantis, but he doesn't have that on the back of his baseball card yet.
Yet. I think the key
Yeah.
there is yet. He hasn't had to. He's not been tested in that way. All right. What else did you want to talk about today, Matt?
Well, what do you think? What did you think of? Obviously, Marjorie Taylor Greene. There was a really good Alana Plot, really good profile of her in the Atlantic. Marjorie Taylor Greene is obviously about to become incredibly powerful, assuming Kevin McCarthy becomes the speaker, because she's backing McCarthy, and seen as like sort of vital to him becoming the speaker. And she just attended this Young Republican gala in New York, where there were white nationalists and other unseemly people there. And Marjorie Taylor Greene at that event said something to the effect of, people say that Steve Bannon and I planned the January 6th riot, but if we had done it, we would have won, and they would have been armed. They would have had guns, something like that. Anyway, that's a lot. What's your take, Bill?
You're not sort of along the lines of the DeSantis stuff. You're not seeing a lot of lessons being learned. You're not seeing a lot of pivoting towards the middle. This is all going on at the same time when the Republicans are having this very tricky speakership fight. That vote is in 2 weeks, and you have at least 5 people. Not Taylor Greene's with McCarthy. Taylor Greene has the quid pro quo with McCarthy, where McCarthy's going to put her back on committees, and so Taylor Greene's going to salute. Whereas you have at least 5 of Republicans saying we don't want to vote for McCarthy unless he gives us the power to have a vacate the speaker motion, so we can essentially try to force him out anytime he does anything that we don't like. And so that dance is going on right now. So it seems like McCarthy, either McCarthy survives by catering to the Taylor Greenes and doing lots of crazy stuff, or he's denied the speakership and someone else gets in there who's catering to crazy people, unless you have a bipartisan revolt that puts in someone like a Fred Upton as speaker without full support of the Republican conference.
You should write that column.
I should write
I don't
that
think
column?
there's enough talk. I don't think there's enough talk about that possibility. You should write that column.
I wrote that column. I wrote that for Real Clear last week.
There you go. Hey,
yeah.
We need to promote that. I had no idea that. Did we talk about it? I don't think I knew that.
I think we talked about it before I wrote it.
If a tree falls in the woods, Bill, we need to push. This is because I think it's an underrated idea that hasn't. I mean, it's obviously not likely to happen,
right?
But it's not absurd. It could happen.
I mean, I think you would probably need a few failed votes in the speaker's balloting. You probably have to get to 2 or 3. No one has a majority situations, and the Freedom Caucus types not budging for the Don Bacon types to say, okay, screw you guys, this is nonsense. Now you already have this omnibus bill moving, and just so folks who may not understand all the jargon here, you got.
I wrote my my college dissertation on omnibus. So, but by all means, Bill, I'll allow you to go ahead and explain this to the newbies.
I mean, in the olden days, you passed a dozen appropriations bills in different issue areas, department areas, to fund the government. It became harder and harder for Congress to actually agree upon independent appropriations bills. So you either pass an omnibus bill, which is essentially doing all those appropriations bills smushed together, or you do what's called a continuing resolution, which is like a half-assed omnibus where you don't really fine tune your line items. You're kind of running on autopilot based on the past year, maybe with a little bit of futzing. And for professional budgeters, continuing resolution is unprofessional. It's not a good way to run a railroad. So better they can do an omnibus that has more thought into it than a continuing resolution. And so it seems like
I might quibble with a few of the things you said there. I probably wouldn't have said smushed, but that's basically right. That's basically right.
Now, generally speaking, these appropriations last for the fiscal year, September 30 to September 30. They punted with a continuing resolution after this past September 30. And they have to decide what to do before. Well, that deadline was this Friday. I think they just passed a 1 week continuing resolution so they could kind of finish up the omnibus stuff. And that should get them through September 30th. McConnell is cooperating with this. The McCarthy critics are livid because this is the thing they hate the most. They want to take a meat axe to government spending, and cooperating with Democrats and being kind of roughly status quo, maybe a little less here, a little more there. That doesn't do it for them. And they were already mad at McCarthy in the past for not playing every card possible to try to force Democrats to accept smaller budgets. So they've already essentially said this is unconscionable. So McCarthy has no choice but to oppose this if he's going to maintain some party unity. But their votes aren't needed necessarily so long as Democrats are unified in the House. But we need bipartisanship in the Senate, which McConnell is providing. So
McConnell, I think McConnell's trying to do McCarthy a favor theoretically, right? I mean,
yes.
And do we really, I guess, from a political standpoint, McConnell would probably prefer there not to be these Tea Party era fights over government shutdowns, right? That's not helpful if you're a pragmatic leader. And also, I guess there is the real danger that these Republicans actually might let, just defund the government and like whatever, not pay attention to the debt ceiling or so there could actually be ramifications. But these Republicans, I guess, all of a sudden care about spending. I thought Republicans didn't care about spending anymore. I'm confused, but they see this as a leverage.
Don't. I take the Freedom Caucus types of their word that they do.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. Though they didn't when Donald Trump was president. The Freedom Caucus didn't care.
They didn't stop it. But
well, I don't think they cared. My recollection is that they voted for all sorts of big spending, not just didn't stop it, but supported it. And I mean, deficits don't matter. And wasn't Trump's chief of staff a Freedom Caucus member at some point? I don't know. I have to go back and look at it. I think I wrote several columns about this.
Were Meadows and Mulvaney Freedom Caucus types? I
think so.
I'm sure Meadows is. If I'd have to go back and look at the whole record. I would imagine there was grumbling about it, but I'm sure they saluted because everyone was hard pressed to go really cross wires with Trump on these things. Trump doesn't care, obviously. Trump's for Social Security. Trump's for Medicare. Trump was trying. The Steve Bannon populist view was we're not here to dismantle the welfare state. We're here to let's do infrastructure. It's okay to spend. We're America Firsters.
As long as you reward the right people.
Yes,
with the government largesse.
And arguably DeSantis is in that camp too, by the way. We'll have to see what he has to say about specific budget items, but I think there's a sense that DeSantis at minimum is someone who's happy to wield government power to benefit his constituencies. He's in no way some sort of libertarian purist.
But I think he was also a Freedom Caucus member.
He may have been, yeah.
I think he was. Don't quote me on that.
But I do believe that Biggs and Good and Norman, I do think they want smaller budgets. That is what they would like to achieve a shrinking of the welfare state. They are far more committed to that than the McConnells of the world. They were probably saying, "Look, I'm all for a smaller budget, but let's be realistic what we can accomplish here."
Well, look, if you cared about cutting spending, you would have listened to Mitch McConnell, elected more Republicans, and then you could do that because you would have more, the majority.
Right. And I think McConnell is very much of the mindset of shutdowns are bad. We're here, government's going to exist and it should be open. And politically speaking, it's always terrible for us when we shut it down. And probably raising the debt limit's a good idea too, so we don't have a global economic meltdown. And so Mitch here is trying to save McCarthy from having to deal with this problem first thing in a new speakership, and at least push it off to September. And I think there's a sense that even McCarthy is in the is a vote no, hope yes person. He doesn't want to have this problem in his lap next month, but he can't say that and keep the party unified. So all these things are happening at the same time, where it would seem that we are going to have an omnibus. We are going to spend a similar amount of money as we have in the past, and that's going to agitate the splinter faction and dig in their heels. I think it makes it more likely they will dig in their heels because the thing they're complaining about is staring them right at the face.
Housekeeping note, Bill. I don't know if you want to keep going or not, but quick housekeeping note. I think the plan is you and I will do a DMZ next week, which is the week before Christmas, and then take 2 weeks off. I think that's right.
That's the plan.
So plan accordingly. I mean, if there's an emergency, maybe we'll do an emergency audio podcast or something. But
I know you're going to want to do an emergency omnibus podcast.
Well, there's nothing sexier than an omnibus. So it could happen.
Is there anything else you want to talk about before we call it a show?
I think we can keep it tight. Keep it tight today. We've been going long other weeks, so keep it tight. Well, everybody read the column I didn't know existed that Bill wrote at Real Clear Politics about the possibility of what Democrats and Republicans kind of working together and going with an alternative, a more moderate alternative to Kevin McCarthy. Check that out.
And check out our emergency podcast, because we didn't talk at cinema today, but we did talk cinema a few days ago. Did you see the Slate piece today on cinema?
No.
There's a person at Slate that has been tracking someone who at least says that they're Kirsten Sinema on Facebook Marketplace and spends an inordinate amount of time selling used goods on Facebook Marketplace. And she bought a pair of stilettos from Kirsten Sinema and picked them up, but it was done through an intermediary. So she was hoping maybe she would actually see Sinema and get the shoes from her, but she didn't see Sinema. But
I've never been more fascinated by Kirsten Sinema than this moment.
So she couldn't prove it definitively, but it does seem like Kirsten Sinema does sell an amazing amount of stuff on Facebook Marketplace.
That is so cool. Love it. She's an enigma. I think it's fair to say.
So if you're in Arizona,
but check
Matt,
it out. We had a whole.
Do you vote Sinema for Senate if Matt Lewis lives in Arizona, which you kind of do already?
I think so.
You would vote for if it was Ruben Gallego, Kirsten Sinema, Carrie Lake for Senate.
Then I think I vote Sinema.
Even though Sinema is pro-choice.
Yeah, if those are my choices, but
you've never voted
who's
for
Ruben Gallego?
He's a progressive Democrat.
Okay, I vote Sinema. But if Doug Ducey's running, I vote Ducey.
Okay, but you would vote for a pro-choice. Someone would vote for pro-choice judges.
In that scenario, if it's Carrie Lake, Sinema, and a hardcore progressive, I would vote for Sinema.
Wow.
Does that shock you, Bill?
That I mean, you've never crossed that line before, Matt.
Well, first of all, there's two developments. One, I don't know if you heard, Bill. They did this thing called Roe versus Wade. They overturned it. So that's changed.
Okay, all right.
Um, and the second thing is there's this thing called the big lie where people
All
are.
right.
So I support the sanctity of life and the sanctity of elections. Those are kind of my two big issues.
So
Those are my
I'm
two
sorry.
big issues.
I know we're like playing World Cup extra time here. So Chris Sununu, governor of New Hampshire, looking to run for president, he says he is pro-choice, that he uses the label pro-choice. He signed a 24-week ban in New Hampshire, with some exceptions in the late term. So it's hardly a 15-week ban or a 6-week ban. But some people in the Democrats saying he's not really pro-choice, he signed this ban, but he would say, hey, look, I'm really in the middle here. 24 weeks is really not that extreme. And I call myself pro-choice. And he was asked in a recent New York Times interview, isn't that going to be like the death in a Republican primary? And he was like, no, it's a different dynamic now. We overturned Roe v. Wade. So could you vote for a nominally pro-choice Republican on the logic of, hey, look, it's already back to the states anyway. Who cares what the president's opinion on this is?
Oh, you mean for president?
Yeah. If DeSantis became too anti-vax for you, and it was Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, and Chris Sununu, what does Matt Lewis do?
So first of all, let me say, and this is for the old people listening, that I'm team Bob Smith. That I supported Bob Smith over Sununu. My wife worked for Bob Smith.
Was that different? Was that different Sununu?
I think it was the same one.
Okay.
I think it was Chris Sununu. I mean, his dad was the chief of staff, right? For
Right.
Bush. Is that right?
Right. Right.
Yeah. So basically, what happened is Bob Smith, was a senator from New Hampshire, really good conservative, very nice guy. I went to a Yankees game, sat next to him. It was cool. But I guess he left. He was critical of George W. Bush, and I think he left the party briefly and ran against him for president or something.
Right.
And so the party, conspired to defeat him, going against their sort of rule of supporting incumbents, and they supported Sununu. So I sort of have a beef with Sununu, just like I have a beef with Larry Hogan Sr.
No, he ran against John Sununu.
Okay. So are they brothers?
Brothers, yes. Bob ran against Chris Sununu's brother.
Okay, so this is a family vendetta that I still harbor the vendetta. Either way, it can go to brothers and sons. Having said that, yeah, I mean, if I will try to vote for the most conservative person in general, the most conservative person who can get elected, as long as they're not involved in trying to support things like a coup. That is a deal breaker.
And it's not to say that Matt Lewis's opinion on abortion has changed at all, but because Roe v. Wade is no longer law of the land, a politician's abortion position is no longer a litmus test for you in deciding your vote.
It is. I mean, if someone is like avidly pro-abortion, that's a deal breaker. But Bill, I don't think it's just Roe. I think Roe has changed, but I also think Trump changed everything. I mean, we are, like I said, the sanctity of elections and the sanctity of life. I mean, some of these candidates like Carrie Lake, she might say she's pro-life, but how could I support Carrie Lake? I couldn't vote for her despite, and so if my choices in the world for president, let's say, if it was either Carrie Lake or Chris Sununu, then I would have to go with Chris Sununu. Mm-hmm. Okay. Does that seem crazy to you?
No, man. I mean, I'm just trying to understand the journey that you're on, Matt. That's all.
No, I don't think I've changed at all. I just think the context has changed.
Well, I mean, a certain fact has changed. 5 years ago, no longer the law.
that, and then 5 years ago, we didn't have to worry as much about, fascists taking over. So we had the luxury of focusing more on public policy issues as well. I mean, Bill, I might not have voted for Mitt Romney. Well, I would have in the general, but I was vehemently against Mitt Romney. And now when I look back at the concerns I have with Mitt Romney, they're very minor compared to the things that we're dealing with in the world today.
All right. We broke some news today, Matt.
Festivus miracle.
What day is Festus? Are we on? Is today Festivus?
It's December 23rd every year.
Okay.
So we're about a week out.
We can talk Festivus next week.
Indeed, for the rest of us. And next week, wear your ugly Christmas sweater or a Santa hat, either one.
I'm not sure I own either one of those things, but I will try.
All right. You've got a week to get ready. We'll see you then.
Okay. All right. Take care.
See you guys.